Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, episode number 58 for the 27th of November 2009. Richard Saunders here once again from Sydney, Australia. Now, to all those people wondering where Stefan's been lately, Stefan's not been very well. He tells me he's getting much better and I think he should be on the show next week. Get better soon, Stefan! Half the Skeptic Zone team this week are jumping on planes and heading up to Brisbane for the Australian Skeptics National Convention. So look out, in the coming weeks there'll be lots of reports and interviews from this convention. And if you're in Brisbane this weekend, the weekend of the 28th and 29th, come and say hello. Now to this week's episode. Dr. Rachie and myself go off to the offices of Choice magazine, the consumer affairs magazine here in Australia, and speak to Christopher Zinn. A fascinating interview. We're big fans of Choice. They're the sort of people who test things and look at things much like the skeptics. That's followed by a short interview with James Randi, conducted over 10 years ago by our good friend Paul Willis. Now, I've chosen this interview, although it's a bit old, because Randi discusses facilitated communication. And this has been in the news lately. And after that, we have the think tank. So sit back, have a nice, chocolate sundae, and enjoy the Skeptic Zone. The consumer's champion, independent and transparent. Choice ensures the consumer voice is heard loudly and clearly. Choice empowers customers to get the most out of their purchasing decisions by providing a mix of advocacy and advice. Dr. Rachie and I headed down to Marrickville here in Sydney, and we spoke to Christopher Zinn, media spokesman for Choice magazine. And we're speaking with Christopher Zinn now, the media spokesman for Choice magazine. Christopher, how long has Choice magazine been going on?
It's 50 years. We're just coming up to the celebration. So really it was born, as were consumer groups in the UK and the US about the same time, late 50s, early 60s, when a lot more consumer products were coming on the market. People had to decide what sort of toaster or kitchen mixer should I get. There were big issues then with product safety, people actually being burnt, cut and killed in things. So it was that kind of drive that got going, and it's after 50 years of checking out this gear, now I think we're all looking ahead. How do we, in this uncertain future in terms of the environment and the economy, what's the role for consumer groups?
And does that mean that there has been a journal for that long, or just a group?
No, the magazine is 50 years old.
Itself?
Yeah, so
wow.
It's been monthly, and we're not-for-profit, so it's really people who've subscribed, signed up on the dotted line, joined up, and that funds all of the research that we do. So we don't get a ZAC from the government or from advertisers. It really is just from people who want to be a part of it because they get a benefit in terms of knowing what's good and what's not good, but also keen to fund our advocacy and campaigns areas in terms of pushing for justice and transparency in various different arenas.
And do you have archives going back that far? The first issue is still available?
Yeah, well, look, we still have the first issue, and I think they were testing tobacco and 22 bullets in those days. I mean, it's amazing when you look back at what were considered consumer items you can't actually hardly buy now. But yes, it's. I think it was low tar tobacco, so they were trying to see if there was any appreciable difference between the two sorts. I don't think we've ever endorsed cigarette smoking.
Right, right.
So, Christopher, you are the public face, I guess, of the Australian Consumer Commission, and at the moment you've got over 200,000 subscribers. How has that changed over that time? Have you found there's been periods where more people have subscribed because of some particular sort of consumer trends or anything?
It grew, and it's the Australian Consumer Association. It grew up until about the 70s to about 200,000, and then it's sort of gone up and down there. But often it can actually be, we found, the global financial crisis, actually there's a bit of a flight to value. People actually wanted to get more value for their spending. So they were prepared to say, well, look, I can join up $80 a year, but it will actually help save me money. And I think that's always been one of our, selling points. We're not for profit. But if you actually engaged with that and found out about private health and insurance and super and all these other things, you would actually save yourself money because you'd find out there are more efficient ways to face these very complicated products and services we now have to engage with.
Well, can we talk about some of the products and services that you do test? You mentioned just then healthcare, which private health insurance, anyone all over the world would know that the plans are always very complicated. But one of the other things you also test, which is complicated, is mobile phone plans. Can you tell us about some of the other products that you do test?
I just have to say about mobile phone plans, that's what they're known as, what's called a confusopoly. In that they're so confusing and deliberately confusing that nobody can compare like with like. And we've got fantastic boffins here with clipboards and spreadsheets. And they're used to comparing, Mongolian yak butter with something from Mexico, but they can't compare mobile phone plans because there's too many variables and the computing power of the universe isn't up to it yet. So, that's something we're always simplicity, and I know that's a value that scientists generally embrace, and that's one we're really pushing for. Simplicity in products, in approach, in description. If we can get simplicity in terms of the way that these things are sold, a lot of the bull falls off them because, it's when you get complexity, that's when the trickiness and the deceptiveness and the sleight of hand, can slip in there unseen.
We know exactly what you mean because, and we might discuss this just briefly, we regularly go, as our listeners will know, we regularly go to the Mind, Body, Spirit festivals in Sydney, or Mind, Body, Wallet as we call them. And this very point about keeping it simple, we challenged some people there to try for our $100,000 prize we have for proof of the paranormal or the supernatural or strange things. And their complaint to us was, we can't take your test because it's too simple. They wanted to make it as complicated as they possibly could. But that is the scientific outlook, I think, keeping it simple.
It is, and as we know, that the world is incredibly complicated, but at the heart of most explanations, there is something, it's a gem of something very simple. It's always fairly hard to find that, but that's part of our challenge anyway, and yours as well.
Yes.
So you have a team here, Christopher, that does all the testing, and can you tell us a little bit about the process whereby you would find a product and then how you would go about testing whether it's any good?
Yeah, it's about 100 people who work at Choice. So there are people who do market research, see what's new in the market, what's worth looking at. There are buyers who go out just as ordinary people. They pay cash and credit card. We actually buy everything. We don't get any freebies or whatever. Then they come back, and then in terms of, if there be fridges or white goods, they're tested by people, and we've developed protocols. How do you actually test a fridge? Well, you've actually got to put it in a thermal laboratory so you can control the ambient temperature around the fridge to see how well the temperature inside. So some of these tests are actually quite complicated because you're not just testing one fridge, you might be testing 20 comparatively alongside each other. So It can be quite detailed. And then again, how do you test a coffee grinder? I mean, there's been a huge growth, just say in coffee percolators, coffee espresso machines people have in their houses. How do you compare those? So we have a standard coffee machine that's a good one, and that makes the standard good espresso, and everything else is measured by a tasting team around that. And then there's where you grind it in the sort of coffee. And another example would be dishwashers. How do you compare the performance of dishwashers? Well, scientific method. You've got to make sure that everything goes in equally dirty. So there are protocols for determining what levels of grease and dirt and organic waste there are on the plates, what sort of plates they are, so you can measure how clean they are. Wow. Clothing, you'd love this. How do you measure washing machines? Well, you have to make sure all the clothes are dirty in the same way to the same extent.
Yeah.
So you actually get a material to make material with dirt already impregnated in it from Europe, and then you can wash it, and you use an optical sensor to determine how white it is to see how much the dirt's gone out. So there's a lot of science in it. Wow.
Why does it come from Europe, just out of interest? That's the standard dirty cloth,
look, probably aren't as much of a market. I know there's probably people listening who think could send in their dirty kids' clothes. In terms of, there's probably only one place in the world who makes, dirty bits of fabric to be tested in washing machines.
Right. So it's kind of like a standard that you would use in a scientific test, maybe. You would get a protein as a standard and measure everything beside that. This is the dirty washing standard.
It's finding what that benchmark is that you could measure other things from.
So you mentioned, and I actually know someone who used to work here who is a scientist. You do have scientists on staff. Can you tell us a little bit about the background of some of your testing people?
Yeah, look, SARO, a lot of the CSIRO culture runs through the veins of this place, you know, in terms of that sense of service and dedication and inquiry. And in fact, curiosity is one of our, you know, brand values, if you like. So that is something that's really pushed, curiosity and inquisitiveness. But we have scientists, as I say, across a realm. Food, I think, would be an important area. That's something people are very engaged and interested in. Additives to food, food wrappings and the effect, what's in food, how do you measure, you know. So we've had to come up with, one test we did recently was, you know, how much added water is there in sliced ham at the supermarket? Well, you know, ham, well, all living things have water in them anyway. Ham has water added to it as part of the curing process. But how do you work out, you know, what is the added water? And that's actually quite complicated. So we have to devise a lot of these tests to really work out how to do it. Another one was phthalates, which is a plasticizer used in the seals inside the metal tops on glass jars. You know, fairly innocuous sort of thing you'd think, but in fact these can migrate into oily foods. But again, it's how you find a test for that so you can compare them.
Actually, that's one of the anti-vaxxers' pet hates at the moment, is they're saying that phthalates are bad for children. So you shouldn't heat up your bottle in the microwave because that allows that process to happen, apparently. I don't think they've done any research in that area.
Yes, well, look, and again, you know, there's endocrine disruptors. And look, again, there are these areas where it's very marginal, but I'm sure we'll find it with mobile phones and brain tumours. You know, suddenly there's the breakthrough research. And that's another thing we do a lot, is review the mainstream journals, you know, the proper hard science. And we've had some good old ding-dongs, people in the, you know, some people in the organic movement. We're not against organic food. Organic food's fine. But some of the claims made for organic food we do take issue with. Some of the claims made about various berries and juices, super juices, we had a good go at those, you know, and the levels of antioxidants. But, you know, people say, well, you know, they send all these references to all these papers and all this research, but we really have to say, well, you know what, we actually stick with the mainstream science, and that's, you know, that is our benchmark.
So actually, on organic food, on your website at the moment, there's a poll where people can vote as to whether they can tell the difference between organic meat and whether they just buy it because it makes them feel warm and fuzzy, or whether they actually can't tell the difference. So people can maybe head to choice.com.
Yeah, what does the poll say? I haven't looked at it recently.
Well, last night, I think it said most people couldn't tell the difference. The next highest votes was for people bought it because it makes them warm and fuzzy, and the lowest was they can tell the difference.
Well, look, it's interesting actually, because people will say they can tell the difference, but really the only thing that counts is, you know, what happens in terms of blind taste testing. And we haven't done all of these, but we've done a number in terms of free-range eggs, in terms of, you know, free-range chicken breasts. People actually can't tell the difference, hardly ever. And we pride ourselves that we can, but actually, ultimately, you know, unless we've got very sophisticated palate, really know what to look out for, it is very difficult.
Yeah, it's just that those products are very much more expensive in general, aren't they?
Well, they are, and not all organic ones are so much more, but many of them can be, and that's the difference. And I suppose it's the argument, you know, people who don't have that much, do you just give one small organic apple to the kids, or do you give them a whole range of conventional fruit? You know, where does the real benefit lie? And those are kind of some of the questions we try to answer.
Well, one of the campaigns that one of the things you investigated recently, which I was particularly interested in, was the pharmacy diets. These are the weight loss diets that you can buy in a pharmacy, and you got quite a lot of coverage in the media for that. Basically, you slammed them in most cases. You said that they nutritionally failed just about on all counts, except for one particular one. And you also criticised them mostly for their upsell. So they would say you might need more nutrients, and we happen to have them here, which you can buy. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And I'm also interested in the response that you received and whether anything's changed in terms of pharmacies now. Have they removed them or modified their practices?
These are mainly meal replacements. So, typically people have seen TV ads or point-of-sale material, we can help you lose weight. And then they're introduced to the consultant at the pharmacy who will develop a plan for them, and then they buy the meal replacements, which is sort of milkshakes often, or some sort of powdered soup. And then, of course, yes, you mentioned there's the upsell of, you might need some more vitamins with that, or some more nutrients, or some more salts, or whatever it is. Look, we sent what we call shadow shoppers, which are sort of undercover people, just to go as a normal consumer would be, to see what they found. And then we also had a panel of nutritionists and people who really knew to actually look at the contents of this to see what they would do. And yeah, look, our concerns were twofold. One, that often nutritionally these things were really lacking, but also the lack of training in terms of the so-called experts on the scene, who really were just sales assistants rebranded as some sort of expertise. And as we all know, issues of weight loss are multifactorial, and you might get someone to lose weight in one particular program, but it's an issue of what happens over time. And that's where we felt that these things were really lacking. And the real underlying point here is a question of trust. Pharmacists, set themselves up and are, in many cases, highly trusted. In fact, all the surveys of trust put pharmacists right at the top. They are trusted. And we felt that this was something that actually would erode consumers' trust in them if they knew really what was going on. So, has there been change? I suppose there's been a lack of confidence in the product, so that must have hurt some of them. Some of the providers of these things, went kicking and screaming, and we always get long letters full of references to this, that and the other.
Oh, yeah.
But
we get those too, actually.
Yeah. Well, look, but our people here are fantastic because they can send back longer letters full of more references with more Royal Colleges in them, and actually often that's it, we never hear tickety-boo from them again. So, as far as I don't think there's any regulatory changes or moves flowing from this, which can sometimes follow as a result of our inquiries, but certainly I think they've pulled their heads in a bit, and while this was a sort of profitable area, I think they'd probably face a few more questions.
Yeah.
Now, I'll just show you this quickly. I don't know if you've glimpsed this before, that we sent that out earlier in the year, and we published it in our magazine, The Skeptic. It's an open letter to the pharmacists of Australia, basically saying, look, there's an awful lot of dodgy stuff in your pharmacies now, especially these devices.
The Hopi ear candles, yes, I've seen them as well.
Which, this other brochure I have right here, which is directly out of a pharmacy. Most pharmacies now that we check out ourselves will sell these ear candles. And it's staggering because even when questioned, the people in the pharmacy themselves either don't know or will recommend them.
Or in some cases they'll say, we know that they're no good, we wouldn't recommend them, but they sell really well, so what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And there have been some fairly mainstream warnings about these things too, I think, from the authorities. So, yeah, look, it's an interesting one, pharmacists, because they enjoy a certain level of protection, that they can keep out competition. They enjoy protections that other businesses don't do. They enjoy a public standing that others don't. But how much further can some elements within them keep pushing the envelope, be it with Hopi ear candles or shonky diet plans,
or
whatever.
even things like having a consultant naturopath and people doing iridology at their pharmacies. A lot of pharmacies will have this come every week, every second week or whatever, and talk to our iridologists. These people are pretending to be doctors. I don't know if you know about iridology itself.
Well, I know that, with something like iridology, it says $13, and people say, well, that's not going to do you any harm. But, of course, then you get lassoed in for regular consultations. And goodness knows what sort of health information will allegedly be imparted and what might distract someone from really seeking a more professional opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Well, to us, it's a really sad state of affairs that pharmacies should go downhill so markedly. In our estimation anyway, when you can walk in and get advice which is akin to witchcraft.
Well, look, I would just say keep pushing it. We keep pushing the pharmacists from the commercial angle, but, it's certainly a good case, and the Pharmacy Guild are very powerful. They should presumably seek to rein in this kind of behaviour if it seems to be in conflict with what are their stated aims and ambitions.
Well, that is true. They do have a code of conduct, and their code of conduct does state that they should be selling things for which there is evidence base. And, for example, in this situation, where there's a homeopathy placed next to a paracetamol for children, surely that's breaching their code of conduct because, as you know, homeopathy is basically water or sugar pills, and it certainly has no efficacy compared to a paracetamol.
But to have and I use the term again, witchcraft next to tested and tried and true medical things like paracetamol, it's outrageous because the person coming in off the street, why should they know? You know, they trust their pharmacy to give them good advice.
But, I mean, looking at this product which says teething relief, it's, it doesn't say homeopathy, brow, well, that sounds, it's sort of quite akin to a respectable German pharmaceutical. It's not exactly the same.
He was a pharmacist.
I don't think it says homeopathy on that side facing us now, but it is. It's homeopathy. That's what they do.
Well, yeah, look, again, we're all about labelling and things being really clear so people can... it's up for people to choose what they want to do, but they need to have, fair maximum amount of clear, honest information. Yes. And, without seeing the whole of that, it's hard to say, but I certainly wouldn't suggest, again, natural. I mean, we come across this natural all the time in terms of food, it's natural, or it's fresh, or it's bio, this, that, and the other. I mean, they're meaningless terms because anyone can use them. There really is no effective control over them.
Yes.
So, whenever it says natural or nature, that's when you really need to turn on your X-ray glasses.
I was just going to change the subject to something that we really enjoy, which are the shonkies.
I was going to do
now, what I want to say about the shonkies, which are the equivalent to our bent spoon, because every year we have the Bench Spoon Award, which we give to the greatest perpetrator of paranormal or pseudoscientific piffle. You have the shonkies, and I must say that they are very well reported every year. A lot of the major news networks and the papers will pick up on the shonkies. I think that's very successful for you.
It seems like only yesterday that we were handing out lemons to companies like Coca-Cola Amatil and Citibank. But already a year has passed and 2009 has presented us with a completely new batch of shonky products and services. Let's take a look at some of this year's winners. It probably comes as no surprise that the cosmetics industry is among the first in the firing line, as it continues to mislead, misinform and misrepresent the abilities of beauty products to lift, decrease and smooth. But the award itself goes to L'Oreal. Why? Because they're worth it.
They always use soothing language, reassuring language, seductive language, relaxing, leave it in our hands, don't bother your pretty head about this sort of thing.
Foodstuffs also showed well this year, with shonkies going to liquid stocks made from powder, presumably saving you the trouble of adding water for yourself.
Chicken stock says no animal products.
And Uncle Toby's for trying to pull the wool over its customers' eyes with some remarkably deceptive packaging practices.
It's not quite as deep as the old. In fact, you get 14% less cereal.
Closer to home, travellers are the ones being stung by Qantas, though the Spirit of Australia is by no means the only airline that's happy to let credit card companies take the rap for its own price gouging on surcharges. It is, however, the worst offender. Of course, the Shonky Awards couldn't be complete without at least one dodgy piece of hardware, and this year we have two on offer. Our first lemon in this category goes to the energy-saving plug that doesn't appear to save you anything, while the second is decisively won by a food processor that quite literally comes apart at the sight of a block of cheese. From shrinking serves and hidden charges to false claims and mechanical failures, the 2009 Chonkies lineup serves to remind us that companies will never get tired of finding new and interesting ways to con you out of your hard-earned money. So it's just as well, then, that we never get tired of telling you what these companies are up to.
Press 3 for enraged and press 4 to off.
Lawrence Grayson, Choice TV.
Bring about real change.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it is because I think it strikes a chord, and shonky is actually a great Australian term.
It's a great term.
You know, and it's onomatopoeia, really. You don't even need to know what it is. Because anything that's shonky, it can't be very good. It suggests that it's a house of cards and it will fall down. And look, I suppose the basic thing of a shonky is that it's not what it states to be, but it really needs a bit of star quality too. So there's that element of hypocrisy in terms of, people saying, well, we've come out with this new size cereal packet to save you money. Hey, it's smaller. How can it save us money, Or the airline that, says that has a massive credit card surcharge and says that they're still losing money on the deal. It's that kind of little twist that gets it to there. But shonkiness is also, we try and test things in science, and there was a great one that we had, you'd love, this year, which was for the Regen micro plug. Now, this thing could solve all of the, global warming problems overnight if it actually worked. It's a plug. You plug into the wall and you plug your electrical device into there, and it's 30% energy savings, at a flick of a switch. Well, we tested it with, hoovers and fans and fridges and didn't find anything at all. With a drill, a handheld drill, we found 5% saving, fairly minuscule. It's hard to measure these things, so it could be meaningless, but it cost you $150 to buy this thing, so you'd have to have the drill on non-stop for 10 years to make back the purchase price. But what was interesting, when we challenged the importers, they said, well, you're testing it wrong. And again, I'm sure you hear this a lot of the time. Oh, you're testing it wrong.
Yeah. Doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. And then they said, well, look, we'll send you some evidence. We thought, that's good. And they sent us the electricity bills from the Rich fried chicken shop in Seoul, which apparently had attached these things to its fridges. And they sent the utility bill, in Korean. I'm afraid it was, but it was such a brilliant, blatant bit of substantiation. Have to frame it. The rich chicken shop's going to save the world.
This is interesting. There's something where we can cross over, because that's exactly the sort of thing Australian skeptics would investigate too. Energy polarizers, fuel savers, energy devices like that. We have on our team, our chief investigator, in fact, is a rocket scientist, a real rocket scientist, and he loves nothing more than going after these sort of devices. In fact, Peter Brock, the racing car driver, the late Peter Brock, won the bent spoon a number of years ago because he was publicising and pushing a fuel polarizer, which was basically a magnetic clip you put in your car around the fuel line. Shonky, talk about shonky.
Oh, look, and they'll keep coming. And again, we had a lot of the fuel ones come out of the woodwork when petrol was more expensive a year or so ago, and doubtless they'll come back. But you know what? They know. It's kind of like we always warn about the scam emails, people trying to get your banking details. But it's with these scams, and I'm sure it's the same with the paranormal, the cost of entry is very low. You can just send an email or proclaim something. The risk of being caught is very low because the agencies don't really take much action against it. But the potential returns are actually very high.
Yes.
Because you manage to latch on to someone who's going to send you their bank details, or someone who's going to, give all whatever the money it is for whatever you're selling. It's a great business, and it's when you look at the incentives and the disincentives, that's when you're going to find these kind of activities breaking out. So it really is a question of regulation and people who are actually going to sit on it and do something. Now, I suppose what we're in is really education to try and tell people, hang on, think twice, be a bit sceptical.
I was very interested to look at your website, choice.com.au, and I was quite impressed by Choice TV, these little videos that you've produced and whacked on there via YouTube. And you don't pull any punches. You state quite clearly, look out for these people trying to con you and so on. Do you not fear legal action all the time?
No, because we check and we check and we check again, and then we're very sure of where we come from. There's only there's one celebrated case of someone who's tried to take us to court, was when there was a gas heater that we claimed could become a potential flamethrower because the hose wasn't properly attached to the heater. And this became quite a big legal test case that's still in the law textbooks for undergraduates. But, we won.
Yeah.
Because we proved it was in the public interest. And I think that's actually where we always lie. We can show that it's in the public interest. So we have various defences at law that we can, push the envelope. But I think, like you too, we use the power of satire and humour, because many of our targets, which are perhaps corporate Australia and corporate global, they're very thin-skinned, they've no sense of humour, that really is their Achilles heel. And I'm sure it's often with those people you go to, they have no sense of humour.
None.
And that's what shows them up for the fakes, frauds, hypocrites that they really are.
Yeah, yeah.
But speaking of satire, I loved one of the satires that you did for this year's Shonkies, which was the cosmetics companies, where you had cosmetic companies make shit up and featuring pro-fecal bee. And I understand that that's coming from the fact that they just get all these scientific terms and put them in a hat virtually and make up, this special active ingredient.
We've taken trace elements of a random exotic-sounding plant and combined it with some generic creamy goop to create Pro-Fecal Bee, a totally made-up name that makes things sound really scientific. Here are some computer graphics that falsely suggest it works on a cellular level, and an airbrush picture of a model who's probably had everything Botoxed anyway. With phrases like clinically proven and an arbitrary list of effects, you'd like to think this is worth the staggering amount of money we're charging for it. But it's not. Cosmetics companies, we make shit up.
But surely you would be at risk of libel or defamation for something like that.
Well, with that video, we didn't actually mention a particular brand, so that was a general. We did give the Shonky, that was the video, and if you can edit it in, it's very funny. We were complaining about the abuse of science in terms of the labelling of cosmetics, and there's one that's come up with a Nutra-Ilium in terms of a shampoo, and again we're saying, well, this sounds like it's about the 150th element on the periodic table. This sounds like something that exists for a nanosecond in a reactor, but in fact all it does is make your hair less frizzy. They're brilliant at coming up with the terms, and it all actually goes back to the Pons Institute, if you remember on TV. People with white coats, people think, that's science, they know what they're doing, that must be good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hilarious, of course, and that's why we love to poke a bit of fun at them.
Yes, I've always wanted to get a job at the Pons Institute, but I ended up at the Heart Research Institute. It's not quite as interesting as that. Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the regulation of these things? Because obviously the government has laws in place to prevent people getting harmed by products that make outrageous claims. We have actually made complaints to the TGA through the Complaints Resolution Panel about things as dangerous as homeopathic immunisation, and then the complaint has sat there for a few months and then just dropped off and you never hear from it again. How do you go about dealing with, government boards in terms of making complaints?
Yeah, normally, it's the ACCC, the Consumer and Competition Commission. They're normally people who complain, but the TGA, look, we've done those as well. I suppose that we'd put in a letter, we wouldn't put just a letter, we'd put in a body of research that probably goes with it, because we'll probably have looked into this. Certainly green claims is one we're looking at again, and that sort of often touches in terms of scientific abuse. Look, complaints procedures, often the regulators have a fairly, glacial process that has to be gone through, so you have to be patient. Often we're disappointed too, that they don't always like to take on the kind of work and targets that we do. But then sometimes, you do get lucky and they're the people with teeth.
So what would you recommend that consumers watch out for? Obviously, they should join Choice.
Well, look, joining Choice does help. I tell you what my advice is, use your intuition. I think deep within all of us, there are little warning bells that go off, and we have very good detectors, and you just need to keep those finely honed. And it's such a cliche, but it's it's that thing. If it seems too good to be true, it must be. I'm afraid it's true.
Yeah.
But what people let happen is that their wish fulfillment, their belief that there is more to the spirit world, or there is a chance of making $1 million from 50 cents. That actually pushes away.
Will cure the cancer.
Yeah, it pushes away the sort of natural skepticism, which we not only have, but we need to foster and encourage, not just within ourselves, but others, because skepticism is a good thing. Don't take things at face value necessarily, or more to the point, know what you can take at face value, know what you can't. And I suppose that would be my advice.
Well, Christopher, what a pleasure it's been to come here and talk with you today. Christopher Zinn, the media spokesman for Choice magazine. And I can really recommend Choice, www.choice.com.au. There's lots of good information on the website. You can subscribe to the magazine and also get the magazine at news agencies.
Online is the big growth area.
Online, that's the preference, of course. Well, Christopher Zinn, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Are your friends telling you that your lack of a love life is because Mars isn't rising in the house of Jupiter, and that it's just like a Sagittarius to question things? Have Suzanne Summers and Jenny McCarthy become the sole source of medical advice for your mother-in-law? Have you had to argue the fact that the efficacy of coffee enemas has not been proven by science? Has the use of the evolution is just a theory argument driven you to the point of telling your coworkers to, okay, stop using gravity then? Has dealing with dowsers, arguing with anti-vaxxers, harping on homeopathists, quarreling with Calations, squabbling with Scientology, and bickering with Bigfoot left you wondering, what can I do to fight the woo?
Then head on over to the James Randi Educational Foundation at www.randi.org and contribute to the Season of Reason fundraising campaign by clicking on the donate button. Every dollar you give helps fight woo the world over. Don't just get frustrated. Get involved. Donate at www.randi.org.
Watching every channel, all that I do is see.
And now we bring you an interview conducted over 10 years ago by Dr. Paul Willis with James Randi. The subject is very topical at the moment: facilitated communication.
People affected by serious disease, illness or trauma and desperate for a solution are vulnerable to exploitation by quacks and charlatans. This is the case for autistic children and their parents, and a technique called facilitated communication. This technique came under the skeptical eye of magician James Randi, and he witnessed a number of autistic children who could not communicate with the outside world.
And yet the facilitated communication people tell us that these people are great poets, and they can do mathematics, and they can write essays and such. And the way they do it is to sit before a communicator, a keyboard, or just a chart of alphabetic letters and numbers, and the facilitated communicator holds on to the autistic kid's hand. The kid can be laying on the floor, and they extend the arm up above the edge of the table and peck around on the keyboard or on the chart, and the children are spelling out wonderful things.
Randi was invited to witness facilitated communication at work and investigate the possibility that autistic children are telepathic. We'll call the facilitated communicator Florence.
I went there and I told her, if you satisfy me that facilitated communication actually does work, then we'll talk about the possibility of telepathy. She said, oh, there's no need for that, Mr. Reddy. It works. We know that it works. I made up, before I went, a bunch of cards with random words on them. Basket, car, bowl, cup. And then with the facilitator sitting there and with the child sitting there, I reached in and took one at random, turned it over. It said on it, car. And I would say to the child, the word is car, C-A-R, car, and show the child the card. I would say, now I want you, with Florence's help, would you type out the word car? And Florence would take the hand, and C-A-R would come out on the tape. We do this 8 or 10 times. And I would say, now we're going to continue the experiment with one change only. I want Florence to leave the room for a count of 15 and then come back into the room. So she'd leave the room, and while she's out of the room, I would select a card at random, say to the child, the word is basket, B-A-S-K-E-T, basket. Florence would go back into the room. And guess what the child typed? Boy, man, woman, brother, sister. And when I said, no, I'm sorry, all of those are wrong, the facilitator looked down at the keyboard with a determined look on her face, and using the child's hand, typed out a message which read, approximately, I don't like this man from Florida. Florence, he's trying to take you away from me. You're my only connection with the world. Florence, please send him away. He's a very bad man. Now, I don't think that Florence thinks that she is doing the typing. I honestly think that Florence believes that the child is doing the typing. I spoke with the father of this little boy, and he took me aside and he said, Mr. Randi, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I don't have any PhDs, but these people do, and they tell me that they're helping me, and I don't know what to say. I took him by the hand and I said, get out of this. It's not working. Your child is not communicating with you. And the tears came up in his eyes. He said, yes, I've known that for a long time, but I can't accept it. We've been trying to reach our child for 7, 8 years now. We just can't do it. And I thought this was a breakthrough.
Hi everyone, this is Andy Kaiser. Richard Saunders was nice enough to let me interrupt the Skeptic Zone to tell you about another gust of wind in the maelstrom of worldwide critical thought. Digital Bits Skeptic is a podcast dedicated to skepticism and critical thinking in our world of New Age, religion, and credulous pop culture. I myself write a few articles, but most are written by everyone else, and they're paid for that effort. If you're an expert in your field, if you need a forum, or if you want to make an impact on not just the skeptical community, but the world at large, I'd like to talk to you. Or if you'd just like to listen to a quality skeptical-minded podcast, that's great too. Find Digital Bit Skeptic at www.dbskeptic.com.
Join us now for Drinking Skeptically in the Think Tank.
Well, from the back room of the downstairs area in a forgotten corner with dying vending machines and poker machines, it's the Think Tank. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Cheers. Can we clunk it over your head or something?
Yeah.
Boy, Ron,
an imaginary glass I have.
What an interesting week it's been in skepticism, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to kick off straight away with that very interesting and bizarre story of that man in Belgium who has apparently been in a coma for 23-odd years. And it seems, or the reports would have us believe, that he's been quite conscious throughout that whole period and just sort of trapped in this terrible situation. That's what I thought when I originally heard the story. I thought that's what they were reporting, and somehow this guy... It didn't cross my mind until I read James Randi's comments on this issue. And then I saw the video, and it was quite clear that, well, to my eyes at least, and to Randi's eyes, I guess, that the helper was actually directing this poor fellow's hand to dot, 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 dot words out on the keyboard, on the computer system they're using. Let me direct listeners straight away to an interview that was conducted with James Randi about this very, very phenomenon called
facilitated communication.
Thank you for facilitated communication.
In the past, used with profoundly autistic children.
That's right. It was used with autistic people, and listeners can go to www.abc.net.au/science/correx/archives/faccom.htm. I'll put that on the show notes.
Did you make that any more difficult, Richard?
That was the link.
Go to Google, search for the Correx files, and type in Randy and facilitated communication.
Or go to skepticzone.tv and find the link on the show notes.
Some people are listening to us right now and go, the typing.
Yeah, the coma guy is going like this. Yeah.
I didn't say that.
Fail.
And I forgot to welcome the ever-tactful Dr. Raichi. Welcome, Dr. Raichi.
Hello.
Hello, yes, sheepishly.
Am I permitted to speak?
Not at the moment. And welcome Joe Benamu, who actually flew back to Australia just for this.
Yes, I did, Richard, at alarming speed.
Now, you were supposed to be overseas right now,
I was supposed to be in London right now. Unfortunately, that part of my overseas jaunt fell through. But I'm still going to be going to New York, so I am very much looking forward to hopefully meeting up with some of the New York skeptics.
Oh, I know Moriel's looking forward to meeting you.
Yes, I'll be seeing Moriel and hopefully George Hrab as well. And, yeah, that should be excellent. But I'm here now, so...
And welcome to Iran Segev.
Thank you, Richard.
And thank you for the grain of salt last week with that interesting adventure through Noah's Ark.
Yes.
Wow.
4 giraffes were there, is that right?
Well, actually, I later noticed that there were actually 4 of most of the larger animals. So there were actually also 4 elephants and 4 rhinos. The thing is that there were 2 on the platform leading out of the ark. They were actually coming out of the ark, and two more. So two of each there, and two more in another area of the garden. The giraffes stood out because they are, they could be seen above.
Because they're evil.
Because they're evil, but also because because they could be seen above the bushes.
Did you know they were evil because of their goatees?
No, because there were four, so two had to be good.
Okay.
And two had to be good.
Anyway, does anybody else have a comment about this situation?
Yes, I have a comment, and Joe and I were discussing this just earlier, and you mentioned that on the news reports that we saw in Australia, they showed his carer actually taking his hand and typing keys on a computer.
Yeah.
But the report that I saw recently, and Joe saw this as well, was that apparently a doctor had given him a PET scan, a PET scan, and had noticed that he had more activity in his brain than was previously thought. And for that reason, they thought that he was conscious. So I'm not sure if the typing was actually the only way they diagnosed it. But I have to say, it looked preposterous.
It looked completely preposterous, and I have to say, I was quite surprised. I had not actually heard yet that James Randi had commented on this and so on. I've had my head in a ditch for the last 24 hours, but when I spoke to everyone else and saw that this had come up, when I first read the article, I also thought, like Richard, gosh, how fascinating. I've heard of locked-in syndrome, and, I thought, well, this must be something like this. The minute I saw the video, I immediately thought, oh my goodness, this is facilitated communication. What was particularly preposterous is that there's actually points where this woman is holding his hand where his eyes are closed.
Yes, Randy makes that point too.
It's quite horrifying. It's really awful to see. Really, really awful.
But if there's voluntary control of the eyes, then there's ways of finding out. You can ask questions and say blink once or blink twice. I mean, that's how communication with patients with the locked-in syndrome is usually conducted.
Yeah, I think some of the tips that it might be facilitated communication are also that now he's saying that he used to speak 4 languages and he can do it again now that he's woken up. Before he had the car accident, that's how he got into the vegetative state. He could speak 4 languages. He's now saying he can do that again. He's saying that he's going to write a book about his experiences, that he's going to go back to university. All this stuff that really doesn't sound like it's coming from him. It sounds like it's the ideas of the help of the carer.
It's actually that would be particularly easy to test because you ask what are the 4 languages and they say what the 4 languages are, and then there's the carer there, and you say just pick a random word in common but random word from these 4 languages. Say, how do you say this in French, German, Spanish, and English?
Are there many simple tests they could do?
There's tests, and the carer obviously, she wouldn't be a carer. She wouldn't be working as a carer if she knew 4 languages, I suppose. But no,
I lost points.
So. Sorry.
Well, it is.
So I think it would be quite a simple test to conduct, and I think I know what the results might be.
I mean, once again, this is an example of credulous news reporting, isn't it? It's a little bit like what we saw last week with the Desiree Jennings story, the Fox News story. My head exploded, Joe.
Oh, yeah. Mine's still in pieces on the floor after that. Actually, I'm glad you raised the Desiree Jennings story because I had an interesting discussion with a colleague of mine who gave me permission to tell you all about this. We were talking about the swine flu vaccine, the H1N1 vaccine, and she was saying that her boyfriend had said that he didn't want her to get it because he was a bit worried about this girl that they'd seen who had become paralysed from the vaccine. And it was just it was a bit of a mishmash of what we had all read about Desiree Jennings. And, she's a nurse and her boyfriend and her are both actually very sort of willing to listen to scientific evidence and very actually pro-vaccination. But it was simply a result of the scare as a result of the Desiree Jennings story that they both felt that there was something to be worried about and it had made them alarmed at the thought of getting the vaccine.
I must say that this is actually, it shows that the condition actually, that it actually does happen because Desiree Jennings' condition is a psychological one, and here's another psychological condition.
Yeah, did you see the Fox story, Iran, on her recovery?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh,
I heard the report
it's
about it.
terrible.
If listeners haven't seen it...
Sorry, I just want to say something. I do not watch Fox if I have a choice.
This is for research. You really should see it, because I watch a lot of...
I don't watch Today Tonight.
All right, you can have the week off.
Thank you.
But if listeners haven't seen it, please just do a search for Fox News and Desiree Jennings, and you won't believe what you see. You won't believe the credulity of the report. It's all the nonsense that you could possibly ever hear. They throw in Jenny McCarthy, they throw in Jim Carrey, they throw in Generation Rescue, they throw in collation, they throw in alternative medicine is curing it. What's his name? Is it Dr. Butter?
Yeah, I think that's his name.
Who is being investigated.
He's the one who's, treating her.
Yeah, he's being investigated for serious breaches of clinical practice, etc. And they say that it's evidence that alternative medicine works. It's so bad that I used a swear word on Twitter, and I never use swear words on Twitter, and my followers would know it was a bad 4-letter word. So have a look.
I used a swear word on Twitter this week, and I never use a swear word on Twitter ever.
I cracked.
What did you say, Reggie?
She said, no, I think she probably said a worse follow were like work.
I said
work.
poop.
Poop.
Yes.
I said poop.
But actually, just on that note, the very special episode of SGU that just came out on the H1N1 vaccine was a very, very good discussion between Steve Novella and
Joel
Beats and Mark Crislip.
Oh,
and,
yeah, that was a good episode. I enjoyed that. I usually enjoy SGU.
It was very good.
I'm wearing their shirt, in fact.
You are.
Can't see it, but I'm wearing a big Skeptic's Guide to the Universe
It's
t-shirt.
a very 70s looking SGU t-shirt. You should have a Mo for Movember to go with it.
This was the shirt designed by Ricky
Burns.
Burns in Western Australia.
Oh, yeah. Very nice.
Pretty cool.
Now, can we talk about the opposite of what we just talked about, and that is good news reporting in the mainstream media? There's a journalist who writes for the Fairfax Press here in Australia. His name's Nick Miller, and if you want to, he's actually on Twitter. His Twitter name is Nick D. Miller, and he wrote a story this week about the risks of getting quack stem cell therapy for huge amounts of money in foreign countries. And Joe's got it in front of her. Joe, can you tell us a little bit about what's in the story?
So this is something that I've heard discussed in a number of science-based podcasts over the last year or so. With the popularity of stem cell research and all the possibilities that we see with stem cells, of course, there have been a lot of quack therapies that have come out. And a lot of private clinics who are claiming to be able to treat everything from Alzheimer's to cancer, all sorts of conditions. And so this report from Nick Miller is raising a couple of cases where there have been suspected cancers that have developed as a result of these stem cell treatments. Now, there are a couple of very, very interesting comments in the article. One of the things that he writes about is the fact that most of these clinics have virtually no published clinical proof of their efficacy, and they promote themselves through the usual testimonials and glossy websites and so on. And something that I just thought was very pertinent was a hematologist from one of the reputable research centres was quoted as saying that a gentleman who had a Queensland man had paid $40,000 for a treatment at a private German clinic, and that she said that this was a treatment that with the most open mind you would not think that this treatment would help him in any way whatsoever. But she specifically said that they'll take his money and not do anything to look after him when he leaves, that if we practiced a treatment like that, we would be disbarred. And, this again raises all these issues of how these people are able to carry out these treatments with no consequences and no standards of evidence.
And no follow-up.
And no follow-up. So it's a very good article.
Are these doctors in these clinics? The supposedly professionals.
I think that was one of them just falling over outside. I don't know what's going on around the corner?
They don't. He doesn't discuss that specifically of what the qualifications are of the people offering the treatments. He doesn't really go into that. He just really talks about what they offer, and the lack of follow up and so on. One of the cases they highlight is. The specific case that they were talking about was a man who developed leukemia following this therapy, and they said that it was very difficult to prove a definite causative link between them. But apparently there is a case report of an Israeli teenager who developed brain tumours from experimental stem cell injections at a Russian clinic.
Okay, great.
And this has been, very well documented. So, as I said, he doesn't discuss specifically the qualifications, but there's definitely documented evidence.
I think we have to be very cautious, I think, to not take these cases, even the case of that boy with the brain tumours, as evidence that it causes any harm. The thing is, treatments should not be provided without evidence of efficacy and safety. And here, these are treatments that haven't been proven to be either efficacious or safe, and here they are, just being bandied about. I think that's the most...
I think this is really interesting too, Iran, because only a week prior to this article coming out, there was a story on Channel 7 on the show Sunday Night, which sometimes does good things. They actually exposed some of the anti-vaxxers back early in the year. But they did a story on autism, and they covered 3 families that were seeking 3 different forms of treatment, one of which was this lady was so desperate she took her 12-year-old son to China to get stem cell therapy. And they covered this in...
What was the condition?
Autism.
For autism?
Yes, for autism, yeah. Of course, there's no evidence, once again. But
I'm not a scientist, so there's things I can say that scientists can't. I have a very strong feeling that it can't work. Unless you use stem cells to replace the child's brain.
No, the basis for the quackery is that the stem cells will seek out the area that needs repair and then go there, basically.
It's a structural problem, it's not damage.
That's irrelevant in this case. It's $20,000, just don't ask, Yeah. But the way that this story was covered by Channel 7, and shame on them, was there were a couple of things that really got my goat, and one of them was the reporter said that they would remove stem cells from the boy's own body and then re-inject them, and then they would inject stem cells from Chinese babies. And then they went to the next part of the story. And so I was sitting in front of my television going, excuse me?
Your jaw hitting the floor.
Stem cells from Chinese babies? A what? I mean, where did these come from? Do you just go and harvest some babies off the street? I mean, there are too many people in China anyway, right? So this was not even mentioned. He didn't say anything. That was it.
Because they're Chinese babies.
Well, maybe that's the case.
But you mean the researcher or the writer has just written this and not given it a thought? Yeah.
No, that was it. That was it. And there was another faily part too, because there was another one of the families, their son is undergoing a clinical trial for a hormone called oxytocin, which the child is actually getting nasally. And this is a double-blind crossover trial currently happening in Sydney. And later on, when they'd filmed the boy undergoing the treatment, they went back to his house with him, and then they said to him, so how do you feel now that you're taking the oxytocin? And I went, fail. The boy's in a random, blind crossover trial. He's not supposed to know what he's getting. And so they kind of unblinded the trial.
Unless... I mean, how would they know, though? If it's double-blind...
Who knows?
Maybe they don't know.
They probably don't know. I don't think they're...
Maybe he could be on either group, in either group. I mean, we don't know that they're even right.
We don't. But the point is, they failed, I mean, they obviously have no understanding of how science works at all. So I was very pleased when Nick Miller wrote this article a week later and actually got it right, because I was hitting my head against the wall at that point, just going, what are you people doing?
I remember you said earlier about credulous reporting by the press, and I was thinking, really? Credulous reporting?
No, never.
I was just about to ask you why you've got that bandage on your head, but now I know.
It's been a bad week. It started with Fox on Saturday morning and then just went downhill. So thank you, Nick Miller, for doing it right.
Let me just mention, and I won't dwell on this because our good friend Jason over at the Nonsense podcast will be covering this, but Rachie and I went to see the performance or the speech, the talk, of an animal telepath.
Do you want me to comment on that?
In case you didn't hear that.
I just did.
Rachel.
It was like that swear word I used on Twitter the other day.
Yeah, now, please go and subscribe to the Nonsense podcast. Look for it on iTunes. We run ads for it, but Rachel and I comment on that podcast because we were there at their request. But, oh, boy.
Imagine, listeners, imagine the looniest people you can find and put them all in one room and shut the door and sit there for 90 minutes and see how you can cope.
When you told me that it was worse than the Bogan Psychic, I mean...
It was
worse than the Bogan Psychic.
Yeah. I can't be said to put them all in a room and look. I just couldn't help thinking of Dara Brian saying, "Get in the sack."
It was something else, believe me, it was something else. Now, I've noticed lately that there's an interesting site that's been reviewing our podcast and lots of other skeptical podcasts. That site's called, Rachel?
It's called The Skeptical Review.
Yeah.
And it's www.skepreview.com.
And I really enjoy reading what other people think about our podcast. I mean, we get a lot of letters from our listeners, which is really great, and they're full of very kind things. But to see something published on the internet about our podcast and other podcasts, I find it is quite invaluable.
It's on the internet, so it must be true.
It must be true.
It's a very nice site. He does a great job with it. So
it's Nigel that runs the site, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nigel St. Whitehall. Yes.
Well, cheers and thank you very much. We're not buttering up to you or anything, but keep...
Oh, you just gave the game away.
No, be honest. All right. Now, this is interesting. Now, what you're holding up there, Joe, is a scan of a pamphlet that somebody actually ripped up and threw in the bin.
Yes, one of our listeners, Ryan, sent this in to me, and in fact, it's quite funny because you can actually see the tear marks from when he's ripped it up in a rage and stuck it all back together before sending it to me. So he was really concerned about this because we've spoken a lot about homeoprophylaxis, or the belief that you can vaccinate with water and sugar pills.
Yeah.
So what Ryan was very concerned about is this company that is promoting a homeopathic vaccination for pets.
Oh. Yeah.
And they say that it's a natural alternative to vaccination, heartworm, tick bite and prevention, tick paralysis, snake bite, multiwormer, allergen immune for all types of insect bites and reactions. And can I say the company name?
Yeah.
So the company is called Naturopatics.
Hang on a second, Rachel.
What?
You know how we were... This pet psychic we went to, this animal psychic, was at Animal Lib.
Yes,
right?
Animal Liberation.
Animal Liberation in Sydney. I wonder what they would think about offering water to animals instead of worming tablets.
Remember when we got in there and the doors were closed and the outlets were sealed and we were stuck there? I turned around and I yelped almost because there was a video cassette on the shelf called Vaccination, the Whole Truth. And at the end, I got up and I looked at it and it was Isaac Golden.
Oh, no.
And Vera Schreibner, amongst others.
So well.
Yeah. And this is at Animal Liberation. Yeah. So they would probably condone this.
Well,
possibly.
Well.
I wonder what Peter Singer would think of people like that using the name of his book as the name of their organisation.
Well, these people were really extreme, actually. And the thing, sorry to interrupt, Joe, just add that the thing that concerned me particularly about them is that these people really do care about animals, and I'm an animal lover myself, but they're wasting all their time.
Your attention, please, members and guests. The courtesy bus will depart in 5 minutes going to Ashbury, Ashfield, Croydon Park, KMC. To Ashbury, Ashfield, Croydon Park, KMC in 5 minutes, thank you.
Sorry, you were saying?
No, you were making a face as if I love animals because I can eat them, and that's not what I meant. However, I won't deny that.
But they are tasty and delicious, though.
I can't eat a whole one. But the thing is, these people are obviously very dedicated and passionate about animals, but why the hell are they wasting their time and the resources of people that give them money on having seminars about explaining how their dog can tell them that it wants a curry for dinner tonight?
Dog wants the curry. That's what she said.
She did. She said...
And she also said she talks to dead cows.
Yeah. But my sister...
I also talk to dead cows. They go... too well done.
My sister's heavily involved in the Greyhound Rescue Program in Australia, and I was telling her about it, and she had the same opinion, was why do these people not direct their energies into something useful instead of sitting around and saying, yes, a cow in France told me it was in distress, so I got on a plane and went there.
Because,
and that's true. I didn't make that up.
It's the same reason that people who have some serious illnesses waste their time going to quacks instead of going to doctors. Same reason. These people do not have all the facts and they're deluded and they prefer to believe comforting
anyway,
lies.
Just to wrap up on this one. So our listener was particularly concerned because with things like tick paralysis and snake bite, of course, these are medical emergencies for animals. And so, this is very worrying that people would be going to these alternatives. But what he did find out, and this is quite useful for our listeners, is if you are concerned about a product like this that is being promoted for animals, you can report it to the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority at www.apvma.gov.au.
Are we doing that?
He is.
He is. Excellent. And probably the RSPCA too.
Yeah.
Actually, I should alert Dr. Alex Lucas, who I interviewed a couple of weeks ago, who's working on designing a vaccine for hookworm. He might just use this instead.
Yes. Save them all the work.
Okay, after all the bad news, I have some good news. I've harped on about religious education in New South Wales schools in the past, and just to reiterate for those who don't know, most public schools in New South Wales and actually across Australia have something called religious education classes, or SRE, which is special religious education. And a lot of people... Scripture. Scripture is the common name for them is Scripture. The official name is SRE, special religious education. And it's not about religion. These are half an hour to an hour a week during which the school authorities hand the kids over to religious groups mandated by the state. And... it's a half an hour to an hour a week of indoctrination of the worst kind. In some cases, there were cases that I know where, say, kids in the Catholic religious education were told by the nun who teaches them that anybody who's not Catholic is going to hell, and the kids a 6-year-old kid who had to be withdrawn because he was distressed about his father, who is not Catholic, going to hell.
What?
So there's all kinds of things like that. The thing is that for a long time, the law in New South Wales dictated that children whose parents opt them out of these classes shall go to the library and do nothing at all. They're not even allowed to read school books. They're allowed to read other books, but they're not allowed to do any work. They're not allowed to study anything alternative. The whole idea is, of course, if you give them... The law basically gives the kids for an hour to religious groups. They will obviously not watch any meaningful competition. So that's been the law for a long time. And recently this... I forgot the name of the... Just a second, I will pause this for a second. Back to this. So recently the St. James Ethics Centre started a campaign to have an alternative in the shape of an ethics class during that time. But the idea is that there's nothing... if the religious groups are saying that they're teaching children ethics and morals... in that case, why not just teach them ethics and morals directly rather than through the existence or lack of existence of a supreme being of some sort? That was quite a fight. And I think it was yesterday, the Premier of New South Wales, Nathan Rees, has announced that the government will now allow a trial of an ethics course in 10 primary schools over 2 terms next year. I'm extremely pleased, of course. I don't think it should have been a trial, but I understand how these things work. I'm fairly sure that if it's just 10, the greatest conveyors of ethics education will be chosen to teach at those 10 schools, and I'm sure it'll be a great success, and that will lead to a good alternative to kids whose parents do not want to send them to religious education classes. So that's a great win for Reason.
That's fantastic news.
It's really great news.
It was looking a little bit, I don't know, grim when it first came up a few weeks ago. There was immediately opposition from the I think it was from one of the Catholic organisations.
Well, actually, it was more than that. It turns out that the sort of the, I'm not sure what they're called, but it was the group within the Department of Education that is responsible for religious education for that time. They're all religious people, and they're the ones who are supposed to be the guardians of that time, and therefore they have the mandate to say whether it's going to happen or not. And they objected on the grounds of there being no basis for ethics and morals and other than through religion and all kinds of silly stuff like that.
So it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely.
So in other words, we'll give religious instruction. The other children don't get anything because, well, you know, if they can't do our classes, then they're not going to do anything. And therefore, they won't be taught any morals and ethics. And see, we're right. If you don't have religion, you've got no morals and ethics.
Yeah. So it's just obviously ridiculous, and it's protecting their turf. I completely understand. I just don't accept. And I'm glad that this is, it's still a small win at this stage because it's just a trial and it's only for two terms. It's only 10 schools. But the door has opened. The door has opened, and I think that's a great win.
It seems ridiculous to me that this would even have to go to this stage.
Oh, I agree.
But the other thing that this leaves open now is a great pool of subjects for a big study, right? So can we take the kids that sat in the garden and drew roses, and then take the kids that did the classes and do a study down the stream and see who's got the worst record for lack of ethics and morals? I mean, we've got the sample there, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's worth doing.
Someone apply for a grant.
Yes, that's right. Now, we are all looking forward to the next few days. In fact, as you're listening to this, we may well be in Brisbane at the Australian Skeptics National Convention this weekend, in fact, the 28th and 29th.
Yes.
Yes, Saturday and Sunday. Yes, Bris Skepticon. That's right. That's just rolls off the tongue. We'll all
Can
be
you
there.
spell facetious, Richard?
Yes. And next week on the show, you'll hear very, very good news and very amazing news about the next convention here in Australia in November 2010.
Yes.
But stay tuned. That'll be very interesting.
Very exciting.
Okay, there was another item in the news today, and that is the son of the person who designed the Opera House. The son's name is John Hutton, and he's an architect himself, and he's now in Australia designing some renovations and changes that are going to be made to the Opera House. And I'm not sure why he's that important, but he's important enough for the Sydney Morning Herald to report that he signed a petition to investigate the September 11 conspiracy. Well, to investigate whether the September 11 attack was an inside job. Two positives about. Frankly, I don't really care what he thinks. He's not the only nutter. He's not the only nutter around, and that's really fine. But there's two things about this article which I found interesting. One is that it starts with the following paragraph. It's short. I'll read it. As conspiracy theories go, it is up there with the CIA assassination of President John F. Kennedy and the fake moon landings. I'm glad that they're comparing this. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And it actually ends with also something interesting that Mr. Hutton said. He actually, when he was contacted by the journalist, he said he had not read any of the official reports and therefore did not regard himself as well informed. I'm saying, if you're not well informed, why do you
feel
sign a
able
petition?
to pass comment on?
Yeah, so if I wouldn't sign a petition about something I'm not informed about, but some people do.
Yes, but your dad didn't design the Opera House.
It's true.
All right. Well, thanks to Iran for coming along.
Thank you.
And thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Richard.
For jetting back to see us.
Yes, and as I said, I won't be at Bris Skepticon. However, I will be in New York, so, if anyone is around, please find me on Twitter at Joe Benhamu.
Are you definitely going?
I am definitely going. Nothing will stop me.
And thank you, Dr. Reishi, once again.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. And until the next Think Tank in a couple of weeks, I guess, or maybe even next week, I'm not sure, depending on what we record. So until then, cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Cheers.
My imaginary glass again.
Our very empty glasses.
Very empty glasses. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Skeptic Zone. Those of you in Newport Beach, California, you have the opportunity to meet yours truly, Richard Saunders, on the 2nd of January, where I'll be at the Muldoon's Irish Pub, 202 Newport Centre Drive, Newport Beach, from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. I think there's some more information on Facebook about that, or you can just ask Brian Dunning. Until the next episode of The Skeptic Zone, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to The Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.
The Skeptic Zone.